Thanks for joining us on Life and Surround.
Hey, thanks for joining us,
Thank you.
everybody. Not only are we here talking today with Stephen W. Taylor, the original audio engineer.
Ronan
Yes,
Alexander.
and Ronan. Okay, Ronan
Hi,
Alexander.
Ronan.
Okay, the reason my co-host Ronan here joins us is that he has auditioned these two new Howard Jones releases with me. This is Humans Live and Dream into Action. These are Howard Jones' first two records. And we have Stephen W. Taylor here with us. Say hi, Stephen.
Hi. Nice to see you again. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us again. So Stephen W. Taylor, original audio engineer on these two records, basically pitched the idea, I think, of kind of reinterpreting the two albums, fresh new stereo mix, fresh new 5.1 mix, synced up to Stephen W. Taylor's visual content. And so we're going to get the story on why that visual content exists. And Stephen W. Taylor's special relationship with Howard Jones, and just like what it was like to work on these two projects, what it's like to create a stereo mix, what it's like to create a 5.1 mix. Would like to hear a thing or two about that, and then any current projects of yours that you're really excited about, that have been released, such as Hawkwind or just anyone else. So we'll primarily talk about the two new releases from Howard Jones. Bottom line up front, I think everybody should own a copy of these. These are two world-class records, some great pop music, some uplifting music. I listen to Howard Jones like when I need a shot in the arm, when I need,
always so positive.
When I need to hit
always
the world
so
positively.
Yeah.
And it should be noted, I think, at the outset that these albums were produced by Rupert Hine. That's a man with whom you had just a profound musical relationship, to say the least, over the years. Not only Howard Jones, but Rush and Tina Turner, and just so many other wonderful acts. And the cool thing about looking over your resume and that of Mr. Hine is that it's like acts that I just love, like just down the sheet. It's like, oh man, like such tasteful work was possible. So hey, Ronan, it's almost time for your bed. So I want you to tell everyone
My favorite song?
what was your favorite song from these two records.
Look, Mama.
Mama, look.
What did you like about it?
Mama, I love you. Very, very catchy chorus for sure.
Yeah.
And he was into a lot of the rhythms on the albums, and he
Oh,
definitely,
great.
did the RCA dog thing. He looked around the room and was like, "Cool sounds, Dad." But as much as he loves many of the songs across these two albums, he commented to me over and over and over again that he was really impressed with the visual content. Like, "Dad, why are we watching the album? Like, this is really cool." And you noticed that some of the imagery was like image based and some of it seemed to be purely computer based. So he has a question for you about your visual work.
Okay.
How did you make it?
How do you make your visual content?
Oh, goodness.
How
right.
do you make your visual content?
Okay, no, let him answer.
Right. Okay. Well, it's there's no simple question. Basically, I see as well as hear music. When I hear it, it sort of opens up all kinds of often abstract visions in my head. Essentially,
Did you understand that? He said that he sees and hears music.
Yes. So I imagine things, and basically in creating these visuals, which I'll go back to the history of how we came to arrive at that. But the idea is that quite often it's meant to be a bit like a light show. It relates rhythmically and sort of dynamically to what you're listening to. That's my idea, is that it sort of complements what you're hearing.
Yeah, so I noticed that it definitely always goes with the music, and it seems
to
Yeah.
does.
And I'm overlaying different layers of what you're looking at. So sometimes you're seeing maybe something that's real, tied up with something that's, if you like, going with the rhythm of the drums. I'd use sometimes the drums to activate a pattern on the screen. And I can't remember the name of all the different sort of plugins and devices I used, but I just found whatever I could that would sort of work with what I was imagining. So, but a lot of it, as I say, is either taking some existing footage and treating it with something to make it more abstract. There are a couple of places where I've taken a video of Howard's, but really sort of mangled it and treated it with all kinds of different ideas and colors and patterns. But something like New Song, I've created a sort of visual, there are two different versions, but I create visual patterns and physically edit them to match what you're hearing. So there's no easy answer because I use so many different techniques to create these.
They really stood out to him, and he wanted to learn a little bit about how they're made. And
Yeah.
hey, I think it's time to say thank you.
Well, there's also another question that I have.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
How do you how do you record the music?
Oh, well, that was also my question.
Right.
So hey, here's
well,
what's gonna have to happen. You're gonna have to go to bed. Go to bed. Go lay down right now, and you're gonna be able to see the answer to that tomorrow. Okay. So say goodnight. Say thank you and good night.
Bye.
good night. Good
I'll
night,
see you
Ronan. Nice to meet
later.
you. You will. Okay. See
All
you
right.
again.
Goodbye. Go lay down.
Bye.
I will see you in a little bit. Go lay down. All right.
Bye.
All right. So,
Oh, it was
like
wonderful.
I said, you segued perfectly
Yep.
into my question. So,
Yeah.
yes, thank you for telling us a bit about how you do your visuals. And I really just wanted to clue everyone in that, the visual aspect of these packages, I think is actually, rather important. I
Absolutely.
understand that
Yeah.
you do visual work for Howard Jones for his live content. And is that sort of kind of the starting point for where some of these came from?
Well, I think what I can do is I could give you a brief history as to what's happened. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people know that I've been involved with Howard since, 40 years since the making of these two albums.
Right.
But in 20 years ago, there was a show, the 20th anniversary concert, that me and my partner Sadia got involved in the filming and the making of this recording. I was actually involved in the filming. I was on stage with a handheld camera grabbing some of the footage. That aside, as I say, we were involved in the post-production of putting this together. And if you like, that was one of the first surround mixes I ever did, because 20 years ago, there wasn't much demand like there is now for multi-channel audio.
Now, a number of engineers worked on that project. You did a couple of tracks, or did you do all of those?
No. I'm coming to that.
Okay.
This was a recording of a live show
of
the 20th anniversary, and the point of that is that because it was going to be on a DVD or a VHS or whatever, it could have surround sound. And so when I put together the audio for this, I was able to do a rather simple, basic surround sound with spreading the sound a little bit, using the audience recording to make you feel like you're in the room. So that was the beginning, if you like, of getting involved with the surround end for Howard. Now, interestingly enough, a few years later, Howard did an album called Revolution, and he wanted to bring out an EP, which ended up being called Revolution Remixed and Surrounded. And he invited me to do one remix for that.
Gotcha.
And that's, I think, what you were referring to.
That's what I was referring to.
And I remember thinking, because we had become more involved with sort of video editing and things, putting this together. I said to Howard, well, how's this coming out? He said, on DVD. I said, well, don't you think it'd be nice, rather than just having a menu on the screen, to have something visual to accompany these remixes? I said, I'll try something with my mix, and if you like, I can do some visuals for the other remixes as well. And so that was, if you like, the start of the whole idea. And they were quite basic, but it sort of started this whole idea. And then when it came to Howard wanting to do these, the live performance of the 2 albums to celebrate their release, he asked me if I'd get involved to create visuals for projections at the show. And this was filmed, so you actually see some of the visuals in the background, but they're not very featured on there.
Sure.
But the whole idea, because Howard liked sort of what I did rhythmically or sort of dynamically. Again, I often say this: it's like doing a light show, a presentation.
Sure.
And so these went down well at the gig, and Howard carried on using some of these projections for well, to this day actually, with some of them.
I probably
that
saw
then
them not
led-
too long ago. I saw him for my first time live a few months ago.
Right.
So I'm sure some of them were there.
Some of them might have been there. Since then, Howard wanted to collaborate on an album called Engage, which is not so well known because it was more like a concept piece. It was conceived as a live, as an audio and visual and music and video concept. And Howard started working on the music, and I started working on the visuals for, again, projection at a live show. And so more videos came out from that. So I've had this sort of ongoing sort of concept with Howard. Now, what basically happened was that when it came time to reissue these 2 albums, I think it was 6 years ago now, they came out with a box set of remastered and lots of extras and all the rest of both these albums. And I remember going to the launch meeting and saying, wouldn't it have been a nice idea to actually have done remixes of these 2 albums, but combining them with these visuals that were created for these albums all those years ago? And Cherry Red seemed interested. So that sort of led to this actually coming together. And, you know, as I said, it was my concept to make it more of an experience that, you know, it's not just a collection of tracks that, you know, you put on and listen to your favorite track. It is meant to be more of a put it on and get involved. That's why
it's its own unique experience. And I want viewers to really kind of be clear on that. It's a fresh new stereo mix, fresh new 5.1 mix, your visuals that accompany the tracks that were custom created for each of the songs, and the songs have a new flow. These don't flow the same way that the original LPs did. Would you mind kind of, you know, just telling everyone your perspective on all that?
Well, I've always, and you know, it's something that came together working closely with Rupert all those years ago, is that we frequently like to put a lot of thought into the running sequence of albums. And sometimes, though, we tried to find ways to make a sort of continuity. Now, really, with these original albums of Howard's, they were very much divided up into separate tracks, mainly because a lot of them were suitable for radio play. So they started and ended, quite often fading out, which was a very typical thing in those days. Yeah, particularly for singles. Although Howard did have a few songs that had proper endings. I wanted it to feel more associated with what live performance is like, in a sense, because you don't have fade outs at live shows. You know, they have to have songs with endings. But also, I like the idea of making one thing flow into another, both musically and visually, so that you could have transitions. And that's why I quite like to use sometimes sound effects or soundscapes to create that. Now, but people may not be familiar with it, but I do make my own music, and my own music is very much based on atmospherics and moods, and my music has definite sort of segues between the different pieces of music and what you see. So it's a bit like combining, you know, my ideas with Howard's to create this new experience. I know some people get a little bit upset that, you know, it's not the same as the original. Well, the original's been reissued so many times before. I've really wanted to make something that was a new experience.
Well, and it can be read in the liner notes that Howard Jones is totally cool with, you know, your transitions and everything. Like he
absolutely
actually he popped in and heard your work.
Oh yes, yes. I mean, I'm very lucky with a lot of these projects I do. I am very much left to my own devices,
Yeah.
and so I come up with ideas. It's not like I'm sitting with an artist looking over my shoulder at every move I make. So I'm very honoured to be allowed to just try things and then present them, and it's so wonderful when somebody really goes along with your concepts. But these albums were always real favorites of mine anyway, and so as I've said, the whole concept of trying to sort of hook up the rhythmic nature or the dynamic nature, it was nice to be able to film Jed for a couple of these videos, both based on what they did originally back in the 80s with Jed on stage, with Equality. Jed would have the whole sort of split down the middle costume and makeup and everything, and he'd dance on the stage, moving from side to side. So it was nice to be able to do a more sort of focused thing with the face and the head and the different sides. But also the assault and battery filming. Again, when Howard was on tour in the 80s, they would have a back projection, a backlit screen on the stage that looked pretty much like what you see here, with Jed doing his mime of the person eating the meal and all the rest. So it was nice to be able to revisit that, but with a bit more emotion in the way it was filmed. I mean, basically, I set up a still camera. Jed did his thing along to the music, but Howard was behind Jed, moving the lighting around so that there was motion in there. So that was a fun thing to do. But as I say, it was made many, many years ago now, almost 14 years, I think.
All right, so this project gets greenlit. You know, you produce the visual content. You are, you know, delivered the multi-track recordings. Were they digitized, or what shape were they in? And what's it like for you as the audio engineer to create these new stereo and 5.1 mixes? Just what kind of insights can you give us? I'm fascinated with how mixes are created. I dabble with it a little bit myself, but no, not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. But I know that a lot of my viewers are also really, really, really interested in how you do what you do. So just any insights that you'd love to give, I would love to hear that.
Well, okay, so I was presented with digitized copies, because these were done on analog 24-track tapes. So they were the tapes have been found in archives and restored and transferred very professionally at high resolution digitally. And for every song, I had a 24-track channel file of the recordings we made. It was great fun recording these in the first place. I mean, we were using lots of experimental ideas at the time, particularly with Human's Lib. I mean, sampling was a very new thing. So we were using quite basic techniques because, you know, all the whatever people look at these days as being, you know, samples that can be played back, you know,
Sure.
recorded and played back. Wasn't that easy back then, but so you'd have to sort of sample one sound at a time and then have to trigger it with something either manually or from a drum machine or whatever. So you spend a lot of time putting these sounds together. But the thing about that was that it meant that we were very creative in some of the sound sources that we wanted to use. And when you hear the first album, Human's Lib, start with Conditioning, you're hearing lots of specially recorded sound effects in that sort of mechanical thing. It's almost like the first thing you hear on the record is these mechanical sounds that we'd put together. And so we're not using anything that was a preset on an existing synthesizer or things like that.
Yeah,
We are
and
creating the sounds.
that can be read in the liner notes too, and it made a
Yeah.
good point. The author made a good point that helps these records steer clear of those cliched sounds that maybe haven't aged so well. These records sound extremely unique. And I know that, like, you know, with the synthesizers, all the options, the millions of options that you can end up with, like, you can go into kind of this fatigue of like options fatigue. But
Yes.
so I
Yes.
know it can be like a challenge to come up with unique sounds and not go crazy doing it.
Well, I mean, there were quite a few. There was new technology at the time as well, and there are some presets that are recognizable on some of these tracks. The Yamaha DX7 was a very new thing, and it had some interesting sounds. But of course, after a few years, everybody was using
Right.
the same sounds. But we wanted to be original and different. But coming back to when I received these files, it was like incredible memory jog to go, oh wow, you know, I remember, you know, what the trouble we went to do that. I previously to working with Howard, I'd started working with Rupert Hine, and we were very experimental, particularly on his solo work. So we had lots of neat tricks that we developed, and Howard was very excited to get involved in that. The wonderful thing about the way that a lot of this was compiled and recorded was you did have separate tracks with these mechanical sounds or the drum beats and synthesizers. Some were programmed quite basically back then, but quite a lot were played live by Howard to tape. But suddenly you think, wow, well, if I'm going to be mixing this in surround, because we were being quite inventive, even in stereo back then, with where some of these sound were being positioned, you could just take that one step further in surround and have the feeling of things moving around you. I'm not a huge fan of generally of being gimmicky in the way I present surround sound. It depends on the genre. I think I've probably talked about this before. You know, if it's a basic band, you don't want to make it too tricksy. You get a band like Hawkwind who are psychedelic, you can be as crazy as you want with how things work. But with the sort of 80s electronic beats and ideas, particularly with the way that Howard worked, both vocally, lyrically, and rhythmically, and with the musical phrases, there was quite often this call and response thing. So
yes,
and that sort of applies in the rhythms as much as in the vocals and the backing vocals, where you can place things differently.
sure.
This music just led itself to being presented in the way that if you like, I probably imagined some of this in the original stereo mix. So it was only stereo back then, but it's interesting listening back to a lot of what we did in stereo on headphones, because you do feel some kind of spatial sort of trickery, even though it was only stereo. There are feelings of depth and width that were in the original concept. That's not to say it was surround, but it had that feeling of enveloping you, particularly in
Sure.
headphones.
Oh,
So
I've heard some very immersive stereo mixes in my day for sure.
yeah, yeah. So it was just wonderful to be able to come back. I wanted to excuse me. I wanted to also try and see if there was a way of if I felt there were one or two sounds in there that felt a bit dated, I wanted to try and make them less dated.
Sure.
Sometimes that might have just been the sound of the snare beat or whatever, but generally, I wanted to sort of be faithful to the original arrangements, but give a little bit of a fresh view into some of the sonic parts, and also a little bit of restoration where maybe things weren't as clear lyrically or sonically as the original. So this was truly an idea of my original concept was, yes, faithful to the arrangements, but a new mix, not just trying to recreate the original in surround sound. It's this is trying to take it in a different direction.
So I've heard the 5.1 and the stereo remixes for both albums. Ronan didn't let me crank the 5.1 as loud as I normally would have, but I had it up where, the bass was thumping, and I feel like it was, fair enough, reference level. I can vouch that these mixes sound great. The surround, I detected some stuff moving from like front of room to back of room. I think it has to do with how things were layered. It all felt like it really fit the arrangements to me and really like opened everything up. I definitely hear things in stereo and 5.1 that I never heard before in the original singles. I'm familiar with all the singles. I didn't own these two albums. I actually think I do have a copy of Humans Lib now, but that was acquired acquired recently, for my vinyl collection. So I don't have a lot of nostalgia for the original two albums, but I am hearing new things, with respect to my memory of the singles. The mixes feel appropriate. I don't hear anything that sounds gimmicky, but it sounds plenty engaging. My son and I both noticed like cool stuff happening, but like yet the song is flowing on. I didn't feel pulled out of the song. So my critique is that these are extremely well executed new remixes, and anybody who is into pop music, Howard Jones, surround sound. There's even some Bob Clearmountain, Atmos, a couple of bonus tracks, per album. These are just very cool sets. These are super cool sets. I love that they were put out in, affordable, at affordable prices and affordable packages. So you're not, it's not this like, vinyl included, 12-inch package, that you pay a fortune for. And, people may only want, the surround experience. And then you get this like visual experience that ties the album together in a new way. So yeah, I'm a fan of these new remixes. So I'm gonna leave links for how these can be ordered. I'm also gonna leave links for your own music because I happen to like your albums, and I want viewers to be able to check you out as well. And so a comment that you had made about like being able to split things like front and back, like with vocals and like all the different layering that Howard Jones did. Rupert Hine is actually on this record, right? Like he
yes,
does some of the singing.
He does quite a lot of the backing vocals.
Yeah.
You can hear he's got a very distinctive tone. Sometimes
I think I can identify him from
well,
like
sometimes it's
from some
him.
Saga records. Like I hear
Yes,
I hear a
yes,
consistent voice across a few
yeah,
of my favorite records.
very particular character. With a
Yeah.
lot of and Tina on Tina Turner's records as well, backing vocals. But with quite often he sang along with Howard. They do some backing vocal things together. So there's this blend
It's a blend,
between
yeah.
them. But there are moments where Rupert is definitely on his own, and you can
Audible.
hear it, and quite often those would be coming from around you.
So
That his voices.
so he was your friend, right? I mean, that's not a stretch to say he was your friend. What was it?
Uh,
What was it
yeah,
like hearing him again? And did that have an emotional impact, or did
I,
it?
always, yes. I mean, I've I've had a lot of memories of working with Rupert. We started working in 1980, so it was 3 years before we got involved with Howard.
Yeah,
But I worked very closely with him on many of his solo albums from that period, and I did a remastering of those albums a couple of years back that came out. So I have been hearing a lot of his voice, but also a lot of fun memories came back working on the Howard's albums. There's a combination of sophistication, in quite a lot of what we did, but also there's a little bit of naivety as well, which I really like. Is just let's try that, let's try this, and Rupert was with many of the artists. He quite often come up with these sort of responding backing vocal
yeah.
lines, whether it is Tina Turner or the Fix or Saga,
Worlds
as you
Apart.
say. Yes,
Is there
and
any possibility at all that you can remix Saga?
well, if I think I've suggested it,
Oh my God, I
but
would love that.
the people have to approach me properly,
Sure,
and
right, yeah.
a lot of it's always down to who's got the rights, the licenses, who's going to fund it. um there are things I'd love to do, but all I can do is suggest it,
Yeah,
and
it's so weird how many of
but
my
then
favorite records you were involved in, and I would love to see
oh
all of them remixed. So
yeah
here's
oh
hoping.
I'm hoping there are some that are coming around. I've been in discussions with a few people, and it is quite often either to do with complicated issues with the original label and the
Sure.
license. And sometimes that's tricky. And with some projects, it's particularly where members of the original album have passed away. You're quite often dealing with the estate or whatever, and so I'm so open to I keep getting offered really interesting projects from Esoteric and Cherry Red, like the Al Stewart and the Jack Bruce that are sort of just coming out,
Right.
and Hawkwind, and I'm a big fan of some of these more obscure but very culturally sort of well-received albums. I'm sort of enjoying that side of it rather than the real mainstream stuff. Although, yeah, I think it might be fun to do some Saga or Rush
Oh
or
man,
Fix
yes.
or whatever, but I have to wait and see who's going to come up with the idea.
I got
But
you. All right,
yeah,
so speaking of remixing, I want to get some like remixing knowledge out of you. So
yeah.
stereo 5.1 Atmos. Like I dabble with some mixing, either my own stuff or for friends or whatever, just mostly for fun, but like nothing ever comes out super well. So like where would you start if you were
Oh,
just like, what's the key, what are some tidbits that you can give for people really
well,
wanting to kind of explore it?
yeah. The interesting thing is that, I mean, I started engaging with surround multi-channel audio almost 25 years ago. But the whole remix concept hadn't really come up with, or most of the first stuff I did was revisiting, as I said, recordings of live shows, usually to go with video. So that's where I started. But then, as I was getting familiar with the whole concept, I moved off into a very experimental soundscape and sound art direction. So I began to be very experimental. I mean, it's partly for things I wanted to do myself, but also working with my partner, Sadia, who is a visual and sonic artist. And very early on, we were getting into multi-channel, even back in the early 2000s. We put together a concept piece in a large cubic room that had a surround system on the floor and a surround system on the ceiling. So that was very early spatial audio in this exhibition space. And that sort of, this experimental work, there was another thing we did, which was where we had soundscapes recorded in quad, but then I made a vertical quad, you know, 2 on the floor, 2 on the ceiling.
Yeah.
Of several different soundscapes that you would walk through. So you would walk through all these changing soundscapes from one to the other. So a lot of what, and then, you know, sort of coming together with what I do with my own music, it's often to do with not the discrete idea so much as the atmospheric and the sort of the way it makes you feel. So I came from it from that very sort of left of field sort of feeling about how to treat, I don't like the word immersive, but you know, but spatial audio. So it was very interesting when I was started to be asked to revisit, and I think, you know, because of Stephen Wilson's sort of been going for quite some time doing these, I was encouraged to come into this world of doing remakes. It's interesting working on something like a band called Camel, who I work with,
Oh,
because
I love Camel.
well, basically drums, bass, keyboards, and guitar, and quite often their arrangements were one guitar, one keyboard, bass, and the same with Van der Graaf and bands like that. They weren't layered, complicated recordings, but they were nicely recorded, quite often with stereo recordings of keyboards and stereo recordings of guitars, or maybe there'd be rhythm guitar and then a lead guitar.
Sure.
And you start to think, well, how can I present that? You know, I don't want to be tricky. I don't want to put the guitar just in one speaker and all the rest. So my concept was always like, well, if you've got a lead instrument and a supporting instrument, you could do something as basic as have the main beat, the bass and drums pretty much central and in front of you. Then you've got a lead instrument that could be wide and in front of you, and if you've got a supporting like a Hammond organ or something, or piano, you could put that behind you. That's very basic, but that is sometimes the approach for a simple setup. Some people might say, well, yeah, couldn't you just put the guitar left and the keyboard right and all the rest? But to me, there's quite often more engaging things about front and back. And yes, if you've got complementary things, you could put them left and right. So it's quite often it's difficult to know where to start. But I do often, if I'm remixing something that was originally done in stereo, I try and see what the concept was. And you know, sometimes my recordings, somebody once stated that the way I mix things was in wide mono, which is very interesting because it wasn't it wasn't that I had this discrete idea in stereo of having things left and right. It's like you could have a mono guitar and a stereo guitar. You could have a mono voice and backing vocals. So people often thought rather than lead vocal and backing vocals, it's like narrow and wide. And so people quite, and that was my concept back in the days of stereo. So I've kind of brought that forward. But there are different genres, as I say, where you might have double track guitars left and right. You can, have them like that or behind you. Or you might have two guitar parts, one that sort of complements rhythmically with each other, bouncing around. So there are no rules. I've said this before. There are no rules with the whole concept. I remember saying this on the event for the launch of these Howard Jones albums in London. I said, there are no rules. And particularly now with surround and also with Atmos, I still feel, I think you say Atmos over there, but
Yeah, we did.
tend to say Atmos. There are no rules. And, I do read a lot of people who have sort of expectations or almost demands about where they think things should be placed in surround and all the rest. And I think it so depends on what you're listening to. Now, for instance, I have started mixing in Atmos, but there aren't any sort of commercial things available yet. But I only started fairly recently, like just over a year ago. And
Can
things
you
take
tell
such
us
I
where
can't.
you're doing that?
Well, at the moment, because I have a very small studio here for my stereo workstation here at Real World, but I have several different ways of working. I work on stereo, and there's so much setting up to do for all these projects.
Oh, for sure.
I do a lot of work in headphones, binaurally and sonically, to set up for surround sound. I have a shared. I share a space over in Chris Hughes' private studio down the road, where I've got my 5.1 set up, because I had to get relocated here at Real World a year ago. We had a much bigger room, but they're developing the building, and I wanted to stay involved in the community here. So I've had to adapt to different ways. So it's really exciting that I have these different things. When I want to work in Atmos, I do all the preparation in headphones and everything, but there's a room here at Real World called the Red Room, which is dedicated to and very beautifully set up for Atmos. And that's where I do my sort of fine tuning and checking how it works. So
you said something a moment ago that is very interesting to me. You mentioned binaural mixing and
yes.
With respect to surround mixing. And I think there's also applications with Atmos or Atmos. Because from what I understand, Atmos has some, channel-oriented capabilities, but also binaural, qualities to it.
That's right, yes.
Can you, because I've only studied it a little bit, I feel like, like I know enough just to get me in trouble. Describe like the part that binaural recording and playback plays in either surround or Atmos or even stereo.
Yeah. I'm not a huge expert on ways to really talk about this, but I mean, binaural originally was very much an idea that I got involved with, binaural recordings. And this is something that goes way back for me, is I used to have a pair of in-ear microphones many years ago that you would record naturally what's going on around you, and then when you listen back on headphones, you get the real feeling of spatialness that it's captured. It's not just to do with the direction things are coming from. It's the way that there's sort of delay in how sound reaches you. And
Yeah, well, the same
by
sound
capture-
wave can hit your right ear and your left ear, but it's never going to hit them at the same time.
exactly, and that creates this impression of space because
Yeah.
it's coming from different places.
Now, with true binaural playback, you have to use headphones because the left ear cannot be allowed to hear what the right does and vice versa.
Exactly. But having said that, now you can, through various algorithms and plugins and methods, and this is kind of where Atmos really sort of comes into it as well, is if you've created something in a sound field in surround, it can be binauralized, if you like. It can be then sort of, it can lead you to think that something that if you're in just in a 5.1 thing and you pan it round to the left at the back, it recreates that sensation binaurally for headphones. Now, it's not exactly the same, but you do get this sense of depth within your head. Now, Atmos sort of takes it a little bit further in that it can sort of recreate the feeling of front, sides, and rears.
It has that directional quality as well.
It does. And a little bit height, although I find that hard to interpret. But, you know, there's a little bit of depth created within headphones.
Well, I know for me, I've done some experimenting how sometimes the same title is put up on Apple Music, the spatial audio. It's basically Atmos.
Yeah.
And so because I have an Apple TV 4K connected to my AVR, but I also have, you know, AirPods Pro, you know, connected to my iPhone, I can listen to the same track or the same album via AirPods and get the binaural experience, or I can listen on my HTS, you know, 7.2.4, you know, Atmos system, and get the more directional experience.
Yes. Well, you know, none of it's exactly the same, but I think this is part of the whole idea, is that you know, it's different ways of being able to experience these things depending on what system you've got. Now, they're not all going to be the same.
Not at all.
And sometimes, you know, the speaker setup will present something in one way, and sometimes the headphones will present it in a similar but sometimes different way. And one can frequently work better than the other.
For sure.
And everybody's system's different. So, I mean, it's a complex world that, as I say, I'm only just beginning to delve into. You know, there's a couple of projects that, again, haven't been announced, I can't talk about. But one thing I am partially off the back of, you know, having really enjoyed this experience working on these Howard things, is that I'm currently reworking my solo albums in Atmos, but both with visuals.
Nice.
Because I never released Ostinato with visuals, but they exist, and I did do a 5.1 mix of them some time ago. But I'm also working on Atmos with slightly reworked versions of these. So,
and Da Capo as well, right?
Da Capo, yeah, and that atmospheric soundscape music that I've worked on, for me, really takes advantage of the whole concept of spatial audio. And so I'm really looking forward to putting that together, hopefully for a Blu-ray set at some point. I know I did a 5.1 with DVD, but and that worked really well. But I really want to take these to the next level, if you like.
Oh, I'm excited to hear that.
But no specific plans at the moment, but I'm just beginning on that, and that has led me into, you know, much more interesting experimentation with the concept of Atmos.
Well, while we wait for you to come up to speed on Atmos and for something to get ready for release, we have a ton of stereo work from you, recording, mixing, stereo mixing, 5.1 mixing. I haven't even gotten through the Camel. I think it's Airborne. Airborne
Yeah,
set.
it's a big
I've
set. That
never
yeah,
even gotten through all of it. Not to
yeah,
mention Van de Graaff Generator, and then
yeah,
a couple of Hawkwind projects,
yeah.
and Jack Bruce.
Yes, his first solo album, Songs for a Tailor. A tailor, who makes clothes, not Taylor, this one, but and brilliant. Again, that's an interesting one to visit in surround, because that has got very distinct, separate musical parts in the arrangements, and that's much more one of trying to make you feel like amongst the music rather than all presented front and back and all the rest. It's just sort of making you feel like you're in the space with the
Sitting
musicians.
in on the session, maybe.
A bit like that.
Oh,
a bit
cool.
like that. But
Nice.
again, trying to be respectful of the originals, and whereas something more akin to Howard Jones, you can be much more experimental, and you don't have to feel like you're in the room. You can try different things out. And as I say, Hawkwind, which I've really enjoyed, there's loads of that stuff I'm involved with, and it is more to do with just, it's sort of hypnotic, that stuff, and you just want it to just sort of grab you, and you don't want to be listening for detail or anything. With that, it is just about creating a mood and a picture, and that's where I find surround sound, whether it's 5.1 or Atmos or whatever, that's really for me where it comes to life, is creating feelings and atmospheres rather than making it sort of very sort of literal, and so that sometimes people just want to sort of pick things out. Well, when you listen to Jack Bruce, for instance, the individual parts are quite sort of discrete and separate, whether it's the position or just the part they're playing,
Sure.
Whereas other bands sounds blend, and again, when we're talking about Howard Jones, quite often he would play one keyboard, but it would be MIDI to two other keyboards, creating 3 layers of sound. So when you're able to put front and back or sides or left and right stereo, because that's interesting as well, when you have a stereo sound and you can put it front left and back left.
Oh, sure.
And have these stereo images to your sides and things in front and back, that creates, again, an interesting picture. So no rules. It's just what suits. To me, it's trying to find what suits the genre and the music, and what the writers and the performers are trying to express.
Hey, so we should probably try to wrap up pretty soon. I need to go check to make sure that Ronan actually went to bed. And I'm sure that you have a busy day, and so I just want to reiterate again just how excited I have been ever since I saw the announcement for these sets coming out, and I think it was an announcement on like your Facebook. I saw you had you had indicated one of the albums, and I was just like so freaking excited. I lost my mind. I messaged you right away. I didn't even know that the second record had been done, which you told me about later. And it turns out, these are just marvelous. I'm so glad that you thought of the idea. That Mr. Jones was, conducive to it and participated. He's so celebratory. His music is it deals with some tough subjects every now and then, but it has this upbeat thing going to it. And a lot of the
Yeah.
songs, like some of these songs are like my, pep songs.
Yes.
And I just appreciate his music so much. I appreciate any opportunity to get like drawn deeper into it.
Yeah.
And certainly your surround mixes do that. I love that you have the absolutely special, perspective of, like original audio engineer, and then you get these tracks sent back to you, and you've been
Oh,
doing the visual work for Howard's live stuff and for, these various projects over the years.
yeah.
And it's just like you get a chance to just go gangbusters. And these songs, like from the songs that I'm familiar with from the original recordings, nothing sounds so different that I really think it's gonna like throw anybody for a loop. But you get that kind of happy blend of homage to the original stuff, hearing some new
Yeah.
stuff, different flow to the way that the songs transition.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are just so cool. These sets are
Thank
so
you.
cool, and they're affordably packaged. And so I'm going to do my best to link everybody to how they can buy these. I'm going
Brilliant.
to link everybody to your work as well. What's the best way that people can follow you?
There's, I mean, I have quite a lot of followers on Facebook where, there's sort of things going on. But there's also, my website is stephentaylor.com, which it just has a sort of a bit about my background and about my current projects and
I'll
things
link
like
it.
that. So that's probably the best thing.
Yeah, you also have a profile on Discogs. So I'll throw up the various links.
Bless you.
And
Thank you.
man, I just really so much appreciate you returning. I always love talking to you, gaining your insights about how you do what you do. I'm glad that you're so busy.
Thank you.
And would you say that most of the work you're doing is for Cherry Red, or how does that work out?
It's between Cherry Red or Esoteric through Cherry Red and Universal, but there are some other things on the go. So,
Okay.
but I've just developed a very close working relationship with Mark Powell, who is so knowledgeable, and he has an enthusiasm about certain artists and periods of music and genres, and he approaches me about them. So so that's a nice workflow we have, but as I say, it's not everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So it's wonderful opportunity. I'm sorry if I ramble a bit when I don't often
The
have
reactions
to speak about things.
The reactions I always read, from like our last talk, is that people just love, that they get a chance to hear your experience from your perspective. So I appreciate you so much coming on, talking about the 2 Howard Jones albums, some of your, current projects like Jack Bruce, Camel, Van de Graaff Generator. There's, Bebop Deluxe. There's just so much cool stuff. Hawkwind, so much cool stuff that you've been involved in. So it's a real treat to be able to just, talk about, these albums that just mean a lot to me. And when you get an artist that you love, engineer that you love, album that you love, and the mix comes out and it's affordable, and like there's nothing wrong with the Blu-ray, it's just like, count your blessings.
Well, I really appreciate everything you do. It's wonderful. It's wonderful chatting with you. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it right back. And I encourage everyone, check out a lot of Stephen W. Taylor's work. Check out Howard Jones. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. I will leave important links in the description of this video, which I commonly do. So check descriptions. And with that, I'll just thank you once again, Mr.
And I'll get back to work.
W. Taylor, for talking with us for a little bit.
Thank you.
And Ronan will be excited to watch the rest of this video when I get it done. And
brilliant. Lovely meeting him.
I wish you success with your work at hand. And until next time, cheers.
Bye-bye.
And to
Thank you.
everyone else, live life in surround.
Very cool. Let's go.
Okay, Ronan, when I tell you to, go ahead and say, thanks for joining us on Life in Surround,
Okay.
however you want to. And then I'm going to give a little intro as to what we're going to talk about. And then I'm going to have you tell everybody your favorite song and then ask your question, okay?